I'm deeply honored and grateful to have the one and only Erica Komisar with me today. Erica is an author, social worker, psychoanalyst, and speaker, a woman on a mission, a woman with a message. So tell us, Erica, what is your big message that every single parent needs to hear?
That mothers are important and that their work is valuable, and that children have irreducible emotional, physical, and neurological needs in the first 3 years, but throughout childhood, but particularly in the first 3 years, what we call the first critical period of brain development. And that need is to have an emotionally and physically present primary attachment figure, usually the mother, sometimes the father. And that putting children in daycare is damaging our children in many, many ways, primarily because the first 3 years is the period of development of the right brain. And 85% of a child's right brain is developed by 3 years of age. And when a mother isn't, or a primary attachment figure is not present to provide the safety and security, that child doesn't develop something called attachment security, which is critical to their future mental health.
Okay. And so, to raise a child, there is, this is the biggest responsibility any of us could take on. For any other big life responsibility, there's a manual, there's a test, there's an exam to pass. But for parenting, there's absolutely nothing. If there were an exam to raise a child, what would that look like?
I would say is that we had a wisdom as human beings about the importance of nurturing our own children. And it's an instinctual wisdom, and it's an evolutionary wisdom, because we're nothing more than mammals. But over the past 3 or 4 generations, we seem to have lost that wisdom. So therefore, people like me are necessary, because I wouldn't say someone that has to teach you these things was necessary 75 years ago, because your grandmother taught it to you and your mother taught it to you, and society reinforced and had great respect for mothering and nurturing and caretaking, not just mothering children, but caring for the elderly and caring for the sick. And we've lost that wisdom. And so what I would say is that not so much a test as a course. If I had a course that and I have developed parenting courses, it would be about learning about the importance of caretaking, both to the people we care for, in this case, children, and their future development, but also to our own emotional development. Because when we only focus on ourselves and are narcissistic, it's also not very good for our own mental health. Although it feels good in the moment, and there's a kind of immediate gratification, it's not sustainable. And in the end, it makes us feel lonely and empty and disconnected from others. And so even though it sounds so good to just you do you, and you go girl, and or you go guy, and in the end, I think the statistics are kind of almost half of Americans feel lonely and depressed at some point in their lives. And so I think we're missing some greater wisdom, which is that giving to others is the meaning of life, not giving to ourselves.
Yeah. That's true. And it is, I feel like, I don't know how it happens, but we've kind of lost our instincts. We're parenting from our heads instead of our hearts, and going against what we even feel is right. And there's so much dangerous parenting advice out there, given by doctors and the pediatricians and the teachers, and
and much of it's counterintuitive.
yeah.
Sleep training, is wrong, and it feels wrong when you're doing it, and therefore it is wrong. And so, the idea that sleep training is forced upon parents by pediatricians, by self-help books, by parenting coaches, and, is just wrong. It's wrong. It feels wrong. It is wrong. Letting a neonate, an infant, cry till they vomit at the age of under 1 is just wrong. And it's wrong for many reasons, but on a biological level, it raises their cortisol, their stress hormone levels so high, and turns on the stress regulating system of their brain well before they're capable of it. And it
Yeah.
does some serious long-term damage to children. So, these kinds of pieces of advice, which I think, again, had more to do with pandering to adults' needs. I want to sleep, I'm tired,
Yeah.
I have to go to work tomorrow, really pandered to adults' needs. The wisdom, again, the wisdom of the ages was that children do best when they're really tiny, when they sleep with you, because they've come out of your bodies and they're not ready to be separated from your body. But when you do put them in another room, the idea was that it's a gentle process and it's an organic process, and it happens over time. Again, in most countries, people don't, children don't have separate rooms and all of this.
Yeah.
But, just the concept of all of this self-sufficiency and separateness, and it is all about adults' needs, not children's needs. So if we really clue in again to children's needs and put them at the center and understand what they need, and understand that children don't sleep through the night on a regular basis for the first 5 years. So you should expect, when you have a child, we always say expectations are everything. If your expectations are misaligned with reality, then you're going to be a very unhappy person. So if you understand that being sleepless is part of being a parent for the first 5 years, and actually, interestingly, once you have children, you never quite sleep in the same way, but it's not a bad thing. I mean, it just is a thing. It's a transformational, even after your children are grown, you're not sleeping like, when you're an adolescent young person and a young adult, you sleep till 11. You're not sleeping till 11, even after your children are grown, because your body changes.
Yeah.
So you're not meant to sleep through the night when you have young children. So this is all, sort of, I don't know, gaslighting, lies to parents. Yeah.
And it's just terrible, because a new parent is in such a vulnerable state, and they don't know what they're doing, and they feel kind of clueless, and they listen to the authority figures and then do so much harm. And I know you said the first 3 years are crucial, but also the adolescent years. And so do parents who maybe messed up the first 3 years and, listen to the doctors, do they have a real chance to heal what they may have damaged in the first 3 years? Is there space for
that? So the title of my first book was The Lost Instinct, and they changed it to Being There, the publisher, because the publisher gets the right to name your book. But I liked The Lost Instinct. And the title of my second book, Chicken Little, the Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. It's such a mouthful. And the truth is that the title was Second Chances.
Oh.
And so that's really, for me, it was, I think both titles were my choice, but the publisher gets to choose. But the idea is that all of childhood is important in terms of your presence. So these two periods are periods of extreme brain plasticity. So you have brain plasticity your whole life. That's the truth. Your brain is shrinking and growing depending on the environment. But there are two critical periods of brain development where the brain is most susceptible to the environment. And that's 0 to 3 and 9 to 25. That doesn't mean 3 to 9 isn't important. It's very important. And there's a lot of, so the way I like to think of it is, so from 0 to 3, 85% of the right brain is developing. From 3 to 9, another 15%. But you say 85% is developed, right? So, and so by 9, there's an overgrowth of brain cells. So think of a garden that's overgrown, that and any good gardener knows you have to prune the garden. Otherwise the garden dies, because if it's overgrown, then the cells can't, in this case, can't breathe, can't do what they're supposed to do. So from 9 to 25, it's a pruning period. But so the brain is once again very susceptible to the environment. And when they're really little, from 0 to 3, you are their environment. You're the center of the universe. That's why you have so much influence. When
Mhm.
they're 9 to 25, you're sharing the influence with peers, coaches, teachers, schools. Doesn't mean that you don't have a great influence, but you're not the same to the same degree their entire universe. Now they have other aspects of their universe. So, but it's very important that you're present in these two periods as much as possible. And that
Mhm.
children have the illusion, you give them the illusion that they're the center of your universe when they're adolescents, even though they may not. I can give you an example of that. So
Mhm.
when my kids were little, I barely worked at all,
Yeah.
just enough to keep my license and keep my toe in the door, like an hour and a half a day. And then when they were adolescents, I started to work a little bit more, still probably only 2.5 hours a day, until they were really out of the house.
Yeah.
But the idea is when they were older and I was working more, I would I dropped them off at primary school at 8:30. I would go to my office and then I would pick them up at 3:30. And when my kids were littler, before they were adolescents, when they were not 0 to 3, but they were in primary school, they used to say, "Mommy, what have you been doing all day?" And I said to them, "Waiting for you, sweetheart."
Oh.
Now, I was at my office seeing patients from 8:30 to 3:30, but they thought I was home, waiting for them. And by the time they came home, when I picked them up at 3:30, I was with them the rest of the afternoon, the rest of the evening. And so, that old image that women hate because they say it's not feminist, of picking your children up from school and going home to a house where you're baking cookies and playing games and hanging out with them and having snacks and doing homework. That is what kids need in primary school and even into adolescence. If you are not there when they come home in the afternoon, they shut down. So there's a period of transition when they're open to speaking to you and
Mhm.
open to sharing with you. But if you are not there, in my second book, I say, if the door swings open, literally and figuratively, and you are not there to communicate with, the door closes again.
Yeah.
Because their defenses are such that they're only going to share with you on their terms, not on your terms. So if you come home at 7 o'clock at night from your job and say, "I'm here, I'm ready to be a great parent to you," it doesn't work like that. And I think that we have lied to parents to say it's all about you. It's
Yeah.
all about you. It's not all about you, not if you want healthy children. It's
Yeah.
about them. You
Yes.
do you do get your narcissism back. You get it back. And you get it back with the deep satisfaction that you've raised healthy children and you've given them what they needed and they love you deeply. And you have that great satisfaction going into your menopausal years of your 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s as a woman, knowing you can take on the world. And
Yes.
you can amp up your career and you can start a business and you can start a nonprofit and you can go work for a company. You can get another degree. But the idea that you are focusing on yourself in your career and outside interests in the years when your children need you, you're just not going to raise healthy children.
I know. It's you can't have both at the
At
same
the
time.
same time,
That
you can
is
have
where
everything in life.
yes,
Everything is
yes,
there for your taking, just not all at the same time.
yes. And in my work with parents, I'm always telling them, give more. You need to just give, 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 you know, like more, because that's what they need. I'm sorry.
It's the ruse of quality time. Quality time is a myth, is a lie that we tell to parents to get them to work harder outside the home. And I mean, there are a lot of lies that we tell to parents. I don't tell to parents, but I actually try to tell parents the inconvenient truths, as you do. But there are a
Mhm.
lot of lies that are told to parents by society, and I think that some of those lies include quality time. That any caregiver will do, particularly when children were little. There's a number of lies we tell parents that we have to tell people the truth.
I know. And one of my clear messages that I push so hard, because it's just so easily, you know, forgotten, is the strength of the relationship between parent and child, the connection, the time, the attunement, the parents presence, but not just presence, not just connection. It sounds so simple and so easy and so vague. And yeah, I connect with them every day, but no, we're not actually.
Right.
This is a deep, this is the hardest thing, is to
Yeah.
truly connect with your child. And we're not. Most parents, we just aren't. And why? Why do you think it's so hard for a parent to be present and to give that their child the connection that, to show up the way the child really needs the parent to show up?
Well, there's something called generational transmission, which is, you don't inherit sensitive, empathic, nurturing behaviors genetically.
Yeah.
You inherit them through something called the it's acquired characteristics. So meaning if your parents were sensitive, empathic, if you're a primary attachment figure, usually the mother, again, I say sometimes the father today, is a sensitive, empathic nurturer, is attuned to your distress, is physically and emotionally a deeply emotionally connected person, can hear your pain, doesn't ignore it, doesn't dismiss it, doesn't shut it down. Can also hear your happiness and reflect that. Is a reflective parent. Then that's passed down generationally through the inheritance of acquired characteristics from your parents. If, however, you had narcissistic parents or detached parents or resentful parents or depressed parents or distracted parents, any of those things are passed down through acquired characteristics. The
Mhm.
inheritance of acquired characteristics, what we call generational transmission. And
Mhm.
so, what I see in my work is it's taken about 3 generations of dismissive parenting, of parenting where, I have rarely met a parent who doesn't love their child. So let me just say that. So this is why I don't blame parents or judge parents, even though the things I say may make parents feel guilty. Um, Even guilt isn't a bad thing, because guilt means that your ego is functioning and something I'm saying is resonating with you. So
Right.
thank goodness, because if nothing I say resonates with you, then in a way you're completely detached from the sensitivity that we need to be good parents, right? We need sometimes we need to be strong, sometimes we need to set limits and provide structure too, but we need sensitivity even in those functions, right? And so if your sensitivity has been so diminished over generations of grandmothers and mothers not being sensitive, then eventually it gets extinguished. The you'd say the light, the sensitivity, the empathy is extinguished. Empathy is not genetic. Empathy
Yeah.
and sensitivity is passed down generationally. So that's what we're seeing. I'm seeing since a lot of movements have contributed to this, things like the me movement and the feminist movement, and have contributed to a misunderstanding of what it means to have choice in life. It's a privilege to have choice as a woman. That
Mhm.
choice doesn't give you the right to neglect children. So that choice does give you the right and the choice to work, to have meaningful careers at some point in your life. It's a choice not to have children, but as Penelope Leach said long before me, if you're going to have children, care for them. Don't have children if you don't want to care for them.
Oh, yeah, giving me goosebumps. Speaking of guilt, and I've heard you say it's not your job to make parents feel guilty, and I feel the same way. But in the same breath, I started my parenting journey on the wrong foot for the first 2 years. I had, neurotic repetition. My nervous system was all over the place. I was extremely loving and present, I thought, but my anxiety, I was parenting from a place of fear, and I was dysregulated. And I saw how that affected my son and his sleep, and then it hit me like a lightning strike, this debilitating guilt that it was me. I was the problem, not my child, not his behavior. I was contributing. I was co-creating. I was bringing that to the table. And it was that guilt that changed me, that saved my son, that
Yeah.
saved our relationship. So that guilt was the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I think guilt could be a great thing if it,
It's a signal feeling, and it's
yeah,
responsibility. And so when you
yeah,
take responsibility, that's the moment that there's hope for your child to change. The moment that you as a parent take responsibility is the moment that there's hope for your child to have a better future.
yes, yes. And, that self-awareness, some people get it from pain, some people get it from therapy, but that consciousness, I feel, must come somehow to a parent so that, because love isn't enough, right? Just love to a
No,
child.
as I said, most parents love their children. Most parents do not understand what their children need and do not understand their children. And I would say most people go into therapy as adults not because their parents didn't love them, although there are children who feel their parents didn't love them or abuse them or physically or sexually or real
Mhm.
trauma with a big T. I would
Yeah,
say most adults go into therapy because they feel their parents didn't understand them. And what that means is didn't understand not only who they are, but what their needs were.
yeah,
And so, for instance, a narcissistic parent isn't a bad person. They're just someone who cannot imagine another person's needs. And because their own needs were never taken care of. So if your own needs are not taken care of, then you can't meet the needs of a child. And so, the idea is parents need to go into therapy if they feel that they're struggling to be capable of giving what a child needs to them, right? So the idea is if you go and do work on yourself, it's the greatest gift to your child,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. And I've worked with, a lot of parents that have children with behavior issues and strong-willed, and uh, the recipe, the solution, the answer was the parent focusing on themselves and healing their unresolved wounds and really looking in the mirror. And because their children were only reacting, right? Children are more reacting than behaving. And I think it's so deeply important that parents do understand the depth of their power, over a child, and what either they're burdening the child with or unburdening them with. And, there's a famous quote by A.S. Neal. It's powerful. He said, "There's never a problem child, only a problem parent."
Yeah.
I know it's hard to hear, but we need to hear it because there's just so much there, but in a good way, that if you take care of this, the rest kind of falls into place. Wouldn't you say, when the
Yeah.
relationship is strong and when the connection is there? And I want to ask you lastly, so all of this is to protect the child's emotional safety. And how does that tie into a child's self-worth?
Well, I mean, self-esteem is based on a healthy self, and a healthy self is developed through that deep emotional connection with a parent. It's developed through a parent recognizing the needs of that child and meeting the emotional needs and physical needs of that child. But it's also based on a parent really seeing a child, seeing their strengths, seeing their limitations, supporting and admiring their strengths, but also not judging and not pushing their child past their limitations, but helping a child to accept their limitations and find their strengths. And so, as human beings, we're not made up of all strengths. We're made up of strengths and limitations and weaknesses. And that's who we are, each as individuals. And so when our parents love us unconditionally as a whole, with our strengths and our limitations, rather than just needing our children to be perfect and admiring their strengths. Then you develop a sense of yourself. You understand and love yourself as a whole, right? So I'm not perfect. I may not be tall enough. I may not be able to sing. I may not, I may not be able to do sports. Whatever it is that you're good at or not good at, but I'm lovable, and I'm a lovable and likable human being as a whole. I'm a good person. That only comes when parents are healthy. I'm going to say good self-esteem in children has very much to do with good self-esteem in parents. We have a lot of walking wounded parents, that don't have good self-esteem themselves, that are highly demanding of themselves to be perfect, and only have strengths, and very critical of themselves for having any weaknesses, and they pass that generationally along to their children. So yeah, it's the idea of healthy parents produce healthy children. Self-esteem in children comes from good self-esteem in parents. Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your passion and your generosity and your message and all you do for exposing children's vulnerability and their needs, and for, waking up parents and all the work you do. I'm truly grateful, and yeah, thank you so, so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.